Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome again to our Sunday evening online Sangha. Special welcome to you, and also a very special welcome to our guest speaker today, His Grace Gaura Kumar Das. He has kindly agreed to give a talk to us. The topic is compassion versus compromise. So let's hear from him. I would like now request Yashika to introduce our guest to our Sangha. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to our Sunday Feast program. We are very fortunate to have His Grace Gaura Kumar Das Prabhuji here with us. Prabhuji is a disciple of His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj, and he is an associate professor at City University in New York, as well as serves as the chairperson of the Computer Science Department. Before moving to New York in 2012, Prabhuji used to work as a research scientist in Microsoft at Seattle, and currently he is the temple president of Srila Prabhupada's Matchless Gifts, ISKCON of 26 2nd Avenue. And Prabhuji's love for outreach is well known among students in New York University, where he holds weekly programs and has cultivated many students in the path of Bhakti Yoga. So I'd like to welcome Prabhuji once again and hand it over to him. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me here, Prabhuji. Especially I want to thank Guru Prasad Prabhu for having me over. And I want to seek all of your blessings so that I may speak something in line with Guru Parampara and something that may be helpful in your spiritual journeys. So before we start, I'll just quickly offer some Mangala Charana prayers. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Chakshur Unmiritam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutare Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So today's topic is compassion versus compromise, lessons from Bharat Maharaj and Indradina Maharaj. So before we start, I want to talk about 4 reasons why we do any activity. I'm not specifically saying that we are focusing on spiritual activities, but even material activities. There are 4 main motivations or reasons why we perform any activity. And this is taken from Chaitanya Shikshamrita, which is from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So the first and the lowest reason for doing any activity is fear. So fear is the lowest activity. Why? So for example, let's take some examples. A child goes to school because he or she may be fearful that if they don't go to school, they'll get punished by their parents. An adult may be going to work because they're fearful that if they don't go to work, they may not get their pay. Or especially in India, some people go to temples because they're fearful that if they don't go to temples, they'll get punished by the Lord. So this is the lowest reason for doing any activity. Of course, there are more levels. The next reason for doing any activity is reciprocation. So at this level, we may be doing any activity so that we get something back in return. For example, we may be going to school so that we get some grades. We may be going to work because we're going to get a paycheck. Or we may be going to temple so that we have a business deal with the Lord, so that I do this so that I get something back in return. Especially in India, if you see, especially during exam times, there'll be long lines in front of the temple because everyone is making a request to the Lord, Lord, let me pass this exam so that I can give you this much money, or I can break so many coconuts, or something like that. So it's almost like a business deal. It's almost on the level of reciprocation. So this is the next level, according to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, for doing any activity. The third level is duty. On this platform, we may be doing a certain activity consistently over a period of time just for the sake of duty. For example, let's take the same example of students. Students may be going to school because they want to see, because other students are also going to school, so they also want to go to school. Or we may be going to work because it's our duty to go to work so that we can protect our family and so on. Or also we may be going to the temple every Sunday because it's our duty that every Sunday we have to go to the temple. Also, although that this is better than reciprocation and fear, this is not considered to be the highest level. Also, it is mentioned that duty over a long period of time can become a trap. And I'm going to explain a little bit about it later. So now let's look at the highest level for doing any activity. The highest level for doing any activity is, of course, love. So what does this mean? So a student may be going to school just because of the love for learning. An adult may be going to work just because he loves his work. Or we may be going to temple because we love taking darshan of deities. We love associating with devotees, and so on. So this is considered to be the highest level for doing any activity. Of course, we can question our motive before we do any activity, whether it's fear, reciprocation, duty, or love. And always it falls in one of these four categories. So these four are also categorized in the different modes. Fear is in the mode of ignorance. Reciprocation is categorized in the mode of passion. Duty is in the mode of goodness. And love is in the mode of pure goodness. Now, I mentioned briefly that duty can sometimes be a trap. So Srila Prabhupada mentioned several times that do not stay, even though we have to go to the mode of goodness, to take off into the mode of pure goodness, staying in the mode of goodness can actually be an impediment in our bhakti. So don't get stuck in duty, grow beyond it. So let's take one example, one story to illustrate this point. So there was a dutiful Brahmin who used to wake up every morning at 4:30 a.m. and chant his Gayatri mantra without fail. On one particular day, he was not able to wake up at 4:30 because he slept late the previous night. But it so happened that at exactly 4:29, someone woke him up. So he did not even bother to see who woke him up, but the fact that he was able to wake up at 4:30 and then chant his Gayatri mantra at 4:30 actually made him very happy. He was actually very content. And then over a period of time, he started pondering, who could it be that woke me up at 4:29? It turns out that it was actually Kali personified who woke him up at 4:29. So why would Kali wake him up at 4:29? Isn't it Kali's responsibility to not let us do our spiritual activities? So, but it turns out that Kali woke him up at 4:29 because he was actually proud. He was actually very proud of waking up every morning and chanting his Gayatri. So if Kali had not woken him up, he would have been humbled. So just so that he doesn't become humbled and he remains in the state of pride, Kali woke him up at 4:29. So here's another example where if we are stuck in this platform of duty, then it can actually become a trap. The trap could come in the form of pride and so on. So also it is mentioned in Srila Rupa Goswami's Padyavali, verse 14, that again, to illustrate this point about duty and love. So this is the verse. So it says, pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness cannot be had even by pious activity in hundreds and thousands of lives. It can be attained only by paying one price, and that is the intense greed to obtain it. So it is that intense greed which makes us take off from the mode of goodness to pure goodness. And it is said that in this verse that if it is available somewhere, one must purchase it without delay. So now that we have talked a little bit about love, now let's look at the ultimate definition of love. ultimate definition of pure devotional service as given by Srila Rupa Goswami, or the definition of Uttama Bhakti. So the definition of Uttama Bhakti, as we all know, the famous verse, there are 4 characteristics of Uttama Bhakti. The 4 characteristics are Anyabhilashita Shunyam, Jnana Karmadi Anavritam, Anukulyena, and Krishna Anushilanam. So what are these 4 characteristics? Anya Abhilashita Shunyam. That means no other desire other than the desire to serve Krishna. That is the first characteristic. The second characteristic is Jnana Karmadi Anavritam. That means our devotion should not be covered over by Jnana or Karma. If it is covered over by Jnana or Karma, it will not be Uttama Bhakti. The third characteristic, is Anukulyena. Anukulyena means favorable. And the fourth characteristic is Krishna Anushilanam. So Krishna Anushilanam means service. Anu means consistent. So consistent service is known as Anushilanam. So these are the 4 characteristics: Anya Bilashita Shunyam, Jnana Karma Dhyanavritam, Anukulyena, and Krishna Anushilanam. So our acharyas have explained that out of these 4 characteristics, 2 are primary characteristics and 2 are secondary characteristics. So the primary characteristics are those that if you remove them, there is no bhakti at all. And the secondary characteristics are those that if you remove them, then it will not be Uttama Bhakti. It will still be Bhakti, but it will not be Uttama Bhakti. So out of these 4 characteristics, which are the 2 primary characteristics and which are the 2 secondary characteristics? I'll give a pause so that you can think about it. So the 2 primary characteristics, as explained by our acharyas, are Anukulyena and Krishna Anushilanam. So as I mentioned previously, Anukulyena is favorable and Krishna Anushilanam is service rendered by the body, mind, and words. So these 2, if these 2 don't exist, there is no bhakti at all. That is why Srila Prabhupada used the word devotional service so many times in all of his books, because it should be done with devotion in a favorable way, and it is service, Krishna Anushilanam. That is why the basic minimum of bhakti is devotional service, Anukulyena and Krishna Anushilanam. Now let's look at the secondary characteristics. Now let's look at the first one, Anya Bilashita Shunyam. Now what that means is you should have no other desires other than the desire to please the Lord. Now, for example, we may be practicing bhakti with the desire for liberation, let's say. If you're practicing bhakti with the desire for liberation, then it will not be considered Uttama Bhakti. It is still bhakti though, but it is not Uttama Bhakti. Or if our bhakti is mixed with jnana or karma, like Jnana Mishra Bhakti or Karma Mishra Bhakti, then also it is not known as Uttama Bhakti, even though it is still bhakti. Now, out of these 4 characteristics, our acharyas explain that Anukulyena or favorable is the most important. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean to be favorable? So there are 2 possible definitions of Anukulyena. The first one is that which is pleasing to Krishna, and the second one is that which is done for pleasing Krishna. Now, both of these look very similar, but only one of them is right. So which one is right? So it is explained that let's take the first one, for example, that which is pleasing to Krishna. So let's look at some examples in the form of demons like Kamsa, Keshi demon, Chanur, Mushtika, and so on. So they all fought with Krishna. So apparently this activity pleased Krishna, but were they practicing bhakti? They were not practicing bhakti. So the correct definition is not the first one, but it is the second one, that which is done for pleasing Krishna. Now let's look at Mother Yashoda. So Mother Yashoda put down Krishna on the floor so that she could take care of the boiling milk. Now apparently that particular activity did not please Krishna. Krishna started to cry. But she did that activity for pleasing Krishna because she wanted to take care of the milk, which would be used for making milk sweets for Krishna. So the correct definition is we have to do that activity with the mood of pleasing Krishna. It has to be done for pleasing Krishna. So this particular definition of Uttama Bhakti has 4 characteristics. There are several other verses in the Bhagavad Gita and in other scriptures where there is a one-to-one mapping between these 4 characteristics and the 4 characteristics mentioned in other verses. For example, let's take Narada Pancharatra. So again, there's a one-to-one mapping between Anyabhilashita Shunya and Sarva Upadi Vinirmuktam. Jnana Karmadi Anavritam matches to Nirmalam. Anukulyana matches to Tatparatvena. Krishna Anushilanam, which is service, matches to Rishikena, Rishikesha, Shrevanam, and so on. So there are several verses in the Bhagavad Gita also where the mention of a pure devotee would include these 4 characteristics. So now that we have established the highest definition of bhakti, now let's look at some practical examples or practical lessons that we can get. So there is always this challenge on our path of bhakti, whether we are loving Krishna more or whether we're loving the false ego more. So let's take this particular example, which most of you may know. This is when Duryodhan and Arjuna approached Krishna before the Kurukshetra war. And at that point, Krishna had made it clear that they would have one of 2 options. One is they could get Krishna on their side, or they could get the vast army called the Narayani Sena of Krishna on their side. Krishna had also told that he would not be participating or he would not be fighting in the war. So, of course, Duryodhan wanted Krishna's army, the Narayani Sena. And because Duryodhan had more faith in Krishna's energies than in Krishna. Whereas Arjuna had strong faith in Krishna and in Krishna alone. So this characteristic is known as ananyata, or exclusive faith, strong faith in Krishna and Krishna alone. So Duryodhan was actually fighting for the wrong cause. He was actually fighting for his own ego, his own material desires. So material desires actually conquer us, cheats us, and even traps us. How does it do it? By design, our senses are so created that they gather all these sense objects from outside. From our senses, we gather the sense objects and program the mind. And the mind, the way it's created is, once the mind is programmed, the output is more material desires. So the more material desires we want, it outputs into more material desires. So it's actually a loop. So the only way to come out of this loop is to dovetail things for Krishna so that we stop these material desires and focus just on Krishna, as in the case of Arjuna. So let me share one funny story in this regard. So this is a story of a hand fan that is sold in railway stations in India, especially in the summer. If you go to the railway stations in India, you'll find people selling these hand fans, right? So on one particular day, there was a lot of people selling these fans for about 5 rupees each. But there was one person who was selling these fans for a very, very low price of 25 paisa, which is 1/4 of a rupee, so 25 paisa. So one passenger looked at this and he said, this is a great deal. Wow, this is a fantastic deal. I should just grab it. So he runs to this person, he gives him the 25 paisa, and then he takes the fan and he starts walking towards the train. And then he shakes it one time, and the first time that he shakes it to start using it, the fan breaks. So, and he gets bewildered. I mean, I thought I had a wonderful deal. I was very happy, and now it broke. So he runs back to this person who was selling the fan, and he says, hey, this is cheating. Why did you cheat me? Because I bought this fan for 25 paisa and it immediately broke. So now that person says, you asked for the deal and you got the deal, but you did not ask me how to use the fan. The way you use the fan is you should hold the fan and you should shake your head. So this is a joke which illustrates how the material world also cheats us. It promises us these deals, it promises us all of these wonderful things, but if you get caught in it, ultimately it leads to our disappointments. So even as devotees, we are not exempt. For example, we always have the choice between choosing Krishna or our own false ego. For example, let's say when we are dressing the deities in the altar. So when we're dressing the deities, I can speak for my own case. Initially, when I started dressing the deities, I was not focusing on dressing Krishna, but I was focusing on dressing my own false ego in the sense that I was thinking, oh, if I dress the deities this way, the devotees will will praise me, and so on. So it was actually decorating my own false ego and not decorating Krishna. So the choice always exists, dear devotees, between choosing Krishna or choosing our own false ego. So are we decorating our own false egos or are we decorating Krishna? So let's move on. Let's take some examples of Srila Prabhupada, who mentioned this point several times on how the material world actually traps us. So this was in Venice Beach in California. And it was during a morning walk, and Srila Prabhupada was walking along with his disciples. It was a very beautiful scenic view. The ocean was seen, the sun was just rising, and some of the disciples said that, Srila Prabhupada, isn't this such an amazing view? This is so beautiful to watch, and so on. And Prabhupada immediately said, yes, it is beautiful, but from a distance. If you go too close, the material world will trap you. And something similar happened in Jagannath Puri during a yatra that was led by His Holiness Radhanath Swami. So in this particular yatra, devotees were warned not to enter the ocean to swim. But there were several warnings given, but because of some high tides that were happening at that time. But in spite of these warnings, there was one very confident or overconfident person who said that, oh, I've swum in so many places, so it won't affect me. So he started to swim in the ocean. And the current actually started to pull him towards the ocean. And he started to raise his hands, asking for help. But the devotees on the beach were thinking, he's saying, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. So they started to say, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. But there was one devotee who actually understood that he's asking for help. And eventually they saved him. But the point is that overconfidence gets us in trouble. So if you're just a little confident, or if we don't even know swimming, then of course we would not even go close to the water. We would probably just touch the water and put it on our head or something like that. But overconfidence actually traps us. So the lesson is that the feeling of happiness one gets in this material enjoyment is the enemy of the conditioned soul. The more happiness we get because of material successes, the more it is our enemy, the more we get trapped. So this feeling that I'm succeeding, I'm progressing on this corporate ladder and so on, if we just completely focus on ourselves, on our ego, then it is actually a trap that is being created by the material world. One more example. This was between Srila Prabhupada and Shyam Sundar Prabhu. This was when in San Francisco, when Shyam Sundar Prabhu was carving the Jagannath Baldev Subhadra deities. And he had actually placed a pack of cigarettes on Balaram when he was carving the deities. So at that point, Srila Prabhupada did not chastise him, but he told him something very profound. He told him that, why do you want to let this pack of cigarettes come between you and Krishna? Just get rid of the pack of cigarettes. And that statement made such a deep impact on Shyam Sundar Prabhu that he eventually got rid of that addiction. Now, we may think as devotees, we don't smoke, we are not addicted to cigarettes and so on, but we are addicted to other things. For example, our cell phone, which also looks like a pack of cigarettes. So we may be addicted to other things, which may also come between us and Krishna. So it is important for us to understand and use things for Krishna. Of course, we can use the cell phone for Krishna. If you're using the cell phone for Krishna and Krishna's services, then it's perfect. But if you're using it for our own false ego, then it actually becomes an obstacle on our path to Krishna. So let's move on. So in this path, as practicing devotees, we always have doubts. We always have fears of failure. What if I fail? What if I fall down? What if some of these obstacles become so big and they completely captivate us? So these doubts always occur on this path. So we don't have to worry, because Narad Muni makes a wonderful promise in his conversation with Srila Vyasadeva. So Srila Vyasadeva also was experiencing this failure, because he was not very happy after uh, writing the entire Vedas. He was not satisfied. He was not completely satisfied. He was experiencing this feeling of failure. At that point, Narad Muni mentions this wonderful verse where there's a promise made. He says, "My dear Vyasa, even though a devotee of Lord Krishna sometimes falls down somehow or other, he certainly does not undergo material existence like others, like fruitive workers. Because a person who has once relished the taste of the lotus feet of the Lord can do nothing but remember that ecstasy again and again." So, as practicing devotees, if we have entered the temple even once, so we don't have to worry, because here, according to this verse, we will never undergo material existence like others. That is why Srila Prabhupada was very particular. He said that whoever enters the temple room should be treated in a very special way, because they are actually invited by Krishna. So, and even if we experience a fall down, we must always fall in Krishna, but don't fall away from Krishna. So, what I mean by this is, even if you fall down, don't leave the movement, don't leave ISKCON. It's okay. Just stay in this movement, and think of it as it is good for our own purification, for our own growth, for our own transformation, and so on. But don't leave, don't move away from Krishna. So that is one thing that, but as long as we stay in this, then we will definitely get pulled towards Krishna eventually. So how Krishna helps us? So Krishna helps us in three ways. It could be a direct instruction, it could be indirectly, or it could be misdirection, which is a test. So let's take some examples of Srila Prabhupada. In Srila Prabhupada's own life, directly, how did Krishna help? He received a direct instruction from his guru in the first meeting itself. So that was a direct instruction given to Srila Prabhupada by his guru in the first meeting to go and preach in the Western world in the English language. So sometimes we can also receive direct instructions like this from our gurus, Shiksha gurus, Diksha gurus, and so on. Also, Krishna can help us indirectly through someone else. As long as we are absorbed in Krishna, that instruction could come indirectly also. In the case of Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada spent a lot of time writing magazines initially. So he took a lot of pain. He wrote these magazines, and he would go door to door, hotel to hotel, restaurant to restaurant, distributing these magazines. In one particular hotel, there was one particular person sitting, and some stranger, he told Srila Prabhupada, "You're an old man. Why are you spending so much time and energy on writing magazines? Why don't you write books?" As soon as he said that, Srila Prabhupada took that instruction as it's coming from Krishna, and he started writing books. And that is how the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavatam, everything started happening. So sometimes Krishna can help us indirectly. And the third way is, sometimes Krishna can misdirect us also, just to test us if we are completely absorbed in Krishna. And we see in the entire Bhagavatam several examples where devotees were tested. And today we'll talk about two specific examples, Bharat Maharaj and Indradumna Maharaj, who were actually tested by Krishna and how they responded. So as we have seen, like Prahlad Maharaj, Bali Maharaj, all of these amazing, Ambarish Maharaj, they were all tested by Krishna, and they all passed their tests. And these serve as wonderful examples for us who read and try to imbibe these modes so that we can actually practice Krishna consciousness in a wonderful way. So direct, indirect, or misdirect. Misdirect is actually tests. So let's move on. So how do we understand Krishna's protection? So many times when we talk about Prahlad, we talk about it being such an amazing miracle that Krishna saved him. But an even greater miracle is that not just that Prahlad was protected from death, but how his absorption remained uninterrupted even through all these difficult tests. So that if you look at all of these pictures here, he was thrown into a pit of snakes. He was about to get trampled by an elephant. He was thrown from a hill. So in all of these cases, his absorption remained uninterrupted. That is a miracle. That is something that we should appreciate. So understanding God's protection, of course, there is a promise that Krishna himself makes in 931, Bhagavad Gita 931. Kaunteya pratijanehi name bhakta pranashyati. O son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. So what does that mean? Now let's look at the example of Parikshit Maharaj. So Parikshit Maharaj was protected in the womb by Krishna. And you can think of that as material protection. And when Parikshit Maharaj was cursed, why was he not protected? That is the question that comes. So in the first case, as I mentioned, it is material protection. And in the second case, he was already protected because he had just heard the entire Bhagavatam and he had transcended the platform of material existence. So in one sense, even when the Takshak bird came and bit him, it didn't affect him so much because he was protected spiritually. So Krishna's protection is always there, either materially or spiritually. But what is needed from our side? From our side, we need to be completely absorbed in Krishna, because absorption leads to protection, as we saw in the case of Prahlad Maharaj also. Because you're so absorbed, it automatically led to protection as it elevates our consciousness. Absorption in Krishna will also take us to Krishna. So these are two things. Absorption leads to protection and absorption takes us to Krishna. So now let's look at today's examples. So now there are some similarities between Indradumna Maharaj and Bharat Maharaj. So both performed their prescribed duties nicely. In fact, they were called Raja Rishis. The word Raja Rishi comes from two words, Raja and Rishi. The word Raja comes from Rajo or Rajogun or mode of passion. So externally, they were performing all of their prescribed duties in the mode of passion while they were performing their kingly duties. But internally, they were actually rishis in the sense that the core, they were completely focused on Krishna. So that's why they're called Raja Rishi. So this is one similarity that existed between Bharat Maharaj and Indradumna Maharaj. The second thing is, after they performed all of their kingly duties, their Varnashram duties, both of them left to the forest so that they could exclusively worship Krishna. And that is called Bhagavad Dharma. So from Varnashram Dharma, they went to Bhagavad Dharma. And both were tested by Krishna. Both were tested in different ways by Krishna, which we will look at. And the final similarity between both of them is both took animal bodies in their next lives. One of them took the body of a deer and the other took the body of an elephant. But interestingly, both of them did not lose their spiritual attraction. So this is the protection that Krishna gives. Once you're on this path, you will be protected and you will not lose that spiritual attraction that is once developed in your heart. So these are the similarities. Now let's look at specific instances of differences between them. So first let's look at Bharat Maharaj and we look at this concept of compassion versus compromise. Now, is it wrong that Bharat Maharaj protected the deer? Now, as we know, the devotee's compassion is born out of his practice of bhakti. The more you practice bhakti, the more compassionate you become. So was it wrong for Bharat Maharaj to protect the deer? And as we all know, very briefly, I'll just mention the pastime. The doe, which was pregnant, was jumping over a river, and which was being chased by a tiger, of course. And then while jumping over the river, it gave birth to a baby deer. And while it jumped and went to the other side of the river, the mother deer actually passed away. Now, there was no one to protect the baby deer. And Bharat Maharaj, when he was witnessing all of these things, he felt that he had to protect the baby deer because there was no one to protect the baby deer. So was this wrong? Was it wrong for him to protect the baby deer? In the Padma Puran, it is said, he who worships the Lord is pleasing to all living entities, and all the inhabitants of the world, both moving and non-moving, are pleasing to him. So it is not wrong. The answer is, it is not wrong for Bharat Maharaj to protect the deer. But what was the mistake? After protecting the deer, he became so absorbed in taking care of the deer that he started compromising on his sadhana. So this was a mistake. He started compromising on the sadhana to such an extent that he completely gave up his sadhana. And his mind is completely absorbed in protecting the deer, so much so that even during the time of death, when he fell into the well, he was thinking of the deer, who's going to protect the deer, what's going to happen to the deer after I die, and so on. And in that state of consciousness, he passed away. And as we all know, he was born as the deer in his next life. And with Krishna's protection, he was able to remember what happened in his previous life. And in his third life, he was born as Jad Bharat, and he went back home, back to Godhead. So this compassion and compromise comes in other places also. For example, the entire Bhagavad Gita was spoken because Arjuna became overly compassionate towards the people on his side of the army and people on the other side of the army also. And because of that, he compromised on his immediate dharma and his Gandiva bow slipped. So because of that, Krishna had to reveal the entire Gita wisdom to make him understand that it's okay to be compassionate, but don't compromise on your dharma. And that Gita wisdom helped Arjuna pick up the Gandiva bow again. Another example is Ajamil. So in the case of Ajamil, Ajamil was bewildered by lust. So he lost all compassion towards his immediate family members, and he completely compromised on all of his sadhana, his practices that he was doing, and so on. But even in his case, because he had practiced sadhana properly previously, Krishna's protection was there and he was given a second chance. So in the case of Bharat Maharaj, in the case of Indradumna Maharaj, in the case of Ajamil, we will see that Krishna's protection gave them their second chances. So the right example, what is the ideal example? Where there is compassion, but there is no compromise on sadhana. The example of Haridas Thakur. So Srila Haridas Thakur knew that it was this king Ramachandra Khan who sent this prostitute to disturb him. So he could have rejected her, he could have kicked her out, or he could have just gone to another village, especially because he knew that she was coming to bewilder him. But he showed compassion on her. He showed spiritual compassion on her and he let her stay. He said, let me finish my sadhana. I don't want to compromise on my sadhana, and I will satisfy you after I finish my sadhana. So here is a place where he never compromised on his sadhana. And because he did not compromise on his sadhana, she was transformed and she became a devotee. So the bottom line is compassion is necessary, but we cannot compromise on our sadhana. So there are 3 lessons that we can learn from this pastime. The first lesson is that initial compassion towards the baby deer was not wrong, as we saw in the verse from Padma Purana. Compassion is born out of one's bhakti. But what was wrong was his emergency dharma, which he did, is also known as apad dharma. So there are 3 dharmas. There's varnashram dharma, there is bhagavad dharma, and then there is apad dharma. Apad dharma is the emergency dharma. So this particular act that he did of saving the deer was his emergency dharma. He had already renounced his family members, his citizens, his kingdom, everything, and he has completely focused on Bhagavad Dharma. And now, because of this emergency, he protected the deer, but that Apadharma should not become your permanent dharma. So one must focus back on Bhagavad Dharma. He went to the forest to focus on Bhagavad Dharma, but he completely forgot that and started taking care of the deer. He became the caretaker of the deer. If that was his intention, he could have stayed back in his kingdom and taken care of all the family members and the kingdom and the citizens and so on. But he gave up all that. But now his dharma was not to be the caretaker. So that was the mistake. So a contemporary example could be someone gets into Harvard School, for example. So they get into Harvard School after studying a lot. And once they get into Harvard School, they start getting attached to a deer. And because of their attachment to let's say a puppy, okay, let's get attached to a puppy. And because of their attachment to the puppy, they give up their studies. So again, it defeats the whole purpose. They put in all that effort to get into Harvard School, and now they're going back. So that's the example. That's the lesson that we learn from this pastime. So compromising one's sadhana to the extent of completely ignoring it is detrimental to one's devotion. But the interesting thing is God's protection, Krishna's protection was always there. Even though he lost his human body, his spiritual attraction was protected in his next life. So what should be our mood during absorption? And the answer to this comes in the next pastime of Indradumna Maharaj. Now, this particular pastime, Indradumna Maharaj was the one who became Gajendra in his next life. Now, this particular pastime occurs in only 5 verses. So we'll try to cover all of them. So it's 8.4.8 to 8.4.12. So the first verse, 8.4.8, talks about 6 ornaments praising Indradumna Maharaj. So Indradumna Maharaj, just like Bharat Maharaj, had just given up his kingdom. He had gone to the forest to completely focus exclusively on the Lord. So he was meditating on the Lord. So this particular verse talks about 6 ornaments. It says he was Jatadaras. He was completely detached. He had given up his royalty just now. He was Tapasa. He was completely austere. He was apluto. He was experiencing ecstasy in that meditation. He was actually feeling bliss and happiness. Of course, both Bharat Maharaj and Indradumna Maharaj, it is said, were on the Bhava platform. So they passed the Anartha Nivritti, then Nishta, Ruchi, Asakti, and they were at the Bhava platform, almost there. After Bhava is only Prema. So, and then another adjective that's used here is Samarchaya, or perfect worship. He was perfectly worshipping the Lord in his meditation. And was he worshipping the right Lord? Yes, his object of worship was also perfect. His object of worship was Krishna, Achyuta. And then he was completely self-controlled also. He was practicing Maunavrata. He was completely self-controlled. So everything seemed to be perfect, right? He had performed his prescribed duties. Now he was completely in bliss, performing the meditation and so on. So he was spiritually fully accomplished. So just when all of these things were seemingly looking wonderful, something happened. So you should expect the unexpected at any moment. And this is what happened in the case of Indradumna Maharaj. At that point, when he was experiencing ecstasy in his meditation, out of nowhere, in the middle of a forest, Agastya Rishi enters. Now, Agastya Rishi was an elevated sage. He was a self-realized soul, so very advanced devotee. So this is the verse that talks about Agastya Muni's entry. The verse starts with this word Yadrichaya. The word Yadrichaya means out of his own will. This word occurs several times in the Bhagavatam, where it is mentioned that out of their own will or out of Krishna's will, suddenly something happened. So we should expect the unexpected at any moment. So the translation of this verse is, Indradumna Maharaj was engaged in ecstatic meditation, worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This great sage Agastya Muni arrived there, surrounded by his disciples. When the Muni saw that Maharaj Indradumna was sitting silent in a secluded place, he became extremely angry. Now let's analyze this a little bit. Now, Agastya Muni is an elevated soul. So typically, when someone very elevated comes and sees a disciple or someone junior to them performing meditation and feeling ecstasy, typically you would expect them to praise that devotee. But in this particular case, something opposite happened. He actually became angry. He became angry at Indradumna Maharaj. So Krishna's will is inconceivable. Not only did he become angry, he also cursed him to become an elephant because Agastya Muni was expecting some respect. So Agastya Muni expects. So at the least expected moment in this world, there could be a reason for a conflict, which is what happened here. So we have limited control over our circumstances. Like in the case of Indradumna Maharaj, he had very limited control over what Agastya Muni was expecting. He had very limited control over how he should, how Agastya Muni wanted him to respect him and so on. But he had control, unlimited control over how he could respond. So Indradyumna Maharaj had no control on Agastya Muni's arrival and even lesser control over Agastya Muni's expectations and emotions. So how did Indradyumna Maharaj respond? So while cursing him, Agastya Muni also used very strong adjectives against Indradyumna Maharaj. He used 4 strong adjectives. He said, "You're asadur, you're not gentle, you're duratma, you're degraded, you're akrita, you're uneducated, and you're offensive." So these are very strong adjectives that are used. Just a couple of verses ago, we saw 6 ornaments of Indradyumna Maharaj. And now, 2 verses later, we are seeing these 4 strong adjectives against the same person. And he was cursed to be an elephant in his next life. So if we were in Indradyumna Maharaj's place at that point, so of course we have completely left everything, we are focusing on Krishna, we are feeling ecstasy, we are focusing on the right object of worship, and suddenly someone comes who's apparently very elevated, not only curses us, scolds us, but also curses us to be an elephant in our next life. What would we do at that point? We have 2 options. One is we again continue doing the service to Krishna, or we would leave everything and go, right? So what did Indradyumna Maharaj do? He chose the first option and he continued to worship Krishna. He did not give up on his worship. So the way we respond to situations is how we analyze them. So there are several examples of devotees who cursed other devotees based on how they analyzed the situation. Just like how Agastya Muni cursed Indradyumna Maharaj based on how he analyzed it. So Shringi, for example, analyzed the situation and gave Parikshit Maharaj a curse. When difficult situations arise in our lives, how should we analyze them? So we should see those incidents as the prasad or the mercy of the Lord, manifesting for our own purification, our own transformation, and our own growth. And how do we always see these incidents as prasad? Of course, it's easy to say this, but how is it possible to see every difficult challenge in our lives as prasad of the Lord? One thing that always helps us is satsang, or association of devotees, helps us understand events in our lives as prasad. But if we leave the association of devotees, if we try to handle it ourselves, then our ability to interpret reality in terms of how it is connected to Krishna's will disappears. So one thing that we practice in our lives, that I practice in my life, is whenever I'm faced with difficult challenges in my life, I immediately take the shelter of devotees. Because through their association, I'm able to understand Krishna's actual will. That is why Srila Prabhupada also mentioned, when he was asked several times, what are the 3 most important qualities that we should have in this path of journey, in this journey towards Krishna. He said, association, association, association. So as long as we have association, sadhu sangha, we are always protected. So Srila Prabhupada gives an elaborate purport on the response of Indradyumna Maharaj here. So he says how Indradyumna Maharaj analyzed the situation. So he says 5 points of analysis. One is, Indradyumna Maharaj said, this is the Lord's desire that I should be cursed. He said, this is the Lord's blessing that I should be cursed. Could be because of my past misdeeds, my past karma. It's a small token reaction for what I actually deserve. It's a purification of past contaminations. So these are 5 ways by which Indradyumna Maharaj analyzed this particular event. And he responded in 3 ways. Of course, as I told you, he could have just left everything and gone, but he did not do that. He continued his worship. He said, I will continue serving Krishna. As long as I'm in this body, I will still continue performing my meditation. I will remain undisturbed. even though all of these things have happened, I will not get disturbed by the curse. I will depend on Krishna for everything. This is how he responded. And he had two expectations. The two expectations are that Krishna will protect me and Krishna will shelter me ultimately. And this is exactly what happened. Krishna did shelter him and give him the protection. In his next life, he got the body of an elephant because of devotional service. He remembered how to worship and offer prayers to the Lord. So this is the example of Indradumna Maharaj. Now, before we end, I just want to share one particular pastime of Srila Prabhupada's compassion on one of his disciples, his foremost disciples, Hayagriva. So this is actually very dear to my heart. It's something that I heard a few weeks ago, and I wanted to share it with all of you. So Hayagriva was born as Howard Wheeler. He was born in 1940. And interestingly, Prabhupada, he came on the Jaladuta in 1965. On the same Jaladuta going back, two American boys, Keith and Howard, went to India in search of a guru. So they went in 1965, they went to India, spent a few months. It is said that around 6 months they spent time in India, and they got malaria, typhoid, and they met a lot of bogus gurus. So they're completely dissatisfied in their search of a guru. They came back to New York, and while at Bowery, who do they see? They see Srila Prabhupada. So they met Srila Prabhupada in Bowery, and they immediately ran to him. So Keith and Howard ran to him and asked him, Swamiji, are you from India? He says, yes, I'm from India. And then how do you know? They said that we just went to India and came back. We were in search of a guru. Then Srila Prabhupada mentioned that, why don't you come to my programs? I have programs on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 26th Avenue. Why don't you come there at this particular time, and so on? And they said, yes, of course, we'll come. But Prabhupada did not stop there. He said that, no, I want to show you where it is. So he took them, he showed them 26th Avenue, and he said, why don't you come here at this particular time? So of course, they started attending Srila Prabhupada's programs. They became very attracted to Srila Prabhupada. And then they both got initiated on September 9th, 1966. So Keith became Kirtanananda, and Howard became Hayagriva Das. So Srila Prabhupada asked Howard before his initiation, the first meeting itself, what do you do? So Howard said that he's an assistant professor in the English department in Ohio State University. So when Prabhupada heard that, his eyes lit up. He said that, wow, this is exactly what I wanted, because I need someone who can edit all these transcriptions that I have. I mean, all these manuscripts that I have. So please take upon the service of editing all of these books. The Nectar of Devotion, and especially the second canto. Prabhupada had a lot of manuscripts of his second canto at that time. So Hayagriva Das was instructed in the first meeting, and he took up that service, and he became Srila Prabhupada's principal editor. And not only that, he was Srila Prabhupada's first professor disciple also. So Prabhupada was very, very attached to him. And of course, Hayagriva was very attached to him also. There was one interesting pastime that happened in 1969. So this was the time when New Vrindavan the community was developing, and there was a need for a temple president at that time. And Hayagriva did not want to be the temple president. So he knew that at some point Prabhupada would ask him to become the temple president. So he had a list of about 10 arguments that he would give to Srila Prabhupada whenever Prabhupada would ask him to become the temple president. So he was completely prepared. And Prabhupada told him, tomorrow morning, why don't you come see me? I have an important service for you. So he was expecting that tomorrow when I go, Srila Prabhupada is going to tell me to become the temple president of New Vrindavan. So he goes there all prepared with all of his arguments ready. And Prabhupada immediately says, Hayagriva, I think you should take sannyas. And he was taken aback. That was not what he was expecting. So he immediately said, no, Prabhupada, I don't want to take sannyas. I have my relatives. Who's going to take care of them? I have so many material desires. Prabhupada said, don't worry, just chant. All of those things will go away, and so on. He said, no, I'll do anything but take sannyas. Then Prabhupada said, become the temple president of New Vrindavan. So he said, oh, okay, I'll do anything. And then he becomes the temple president of New Vrindavan. This was in 1969. And also in 1972, he traveled to India with Srila Prabhupada. And then this is at the famous Radha Damodar temple where Prabhupada delivered a series of lectures on nectar of devotion. Hayagriva was actually in the audience. So he was very attached to Srila Prabhupada. But because of his previous conditionings, they all came doing all of his practices. He stopped following the four regulative principles. He stopped chanting. He completely moved away from ISKCON. But Srila Prabhupada never forgot him. He would always ask other people who were close to him, like Jayadvaita Maharaj and Kirtananda Maharaj, where is Hayagriva? Where is Hayagriva? And he was found later on in 1976 when Prabhupada went to Hawaii. And Prabhupada was told that Hayagriva is in Hawaii. So Prabhupada said, somehow can you bring him to me? So when they brought Hayagriva to Prabhupada, and at that time he had a beard, he was wearing karmi clothes, there was no tilak. And then he, because of his love for Srila Prabhupada, he still touched the feet of Srila Prabhupada and placed it to his head. And Prabhupada showered him with lots of love. And he said he wanted to engage him in service. So he told him, I'm going to give you some more manuscripts. Can you please edit them? Of course, Hayagriva Prabhu took that and he started editing them. But still, after Prabhupada left Hawaii and so on, he again fell down. This was the second time. And this time it came back even strongly. He completely moved away. And Srila Prabhupada, till he passed away, Srila Prabhupada left this world on November 14th, 1977. Even in the beginning of November, it is said that Prabhupada was asking everybody, where is Hayagriva? Where is Hayagriva? At that point, other disciples were asking, Prabhupada, he is gone. But he said, I can never forgive him, never forget him, because he was the one who was there for me when none of you were there. He was the one who actually did the editing work for me. So he had so much love for Hayagriva. Of course, Hayagriva and Prabhupada never met after 1976. But Hayagriva was found again much later, 12 years after Srila Prabhupada left the world. He was found in Goa. So by Srinathji Prabhu. So Srinathji Prabhu is also N.D. Desai. Some of you may know him. He's no longer on this planet, but he was the one who found Hayagriva Prabhu. Someone told Srinathji Prabhu that Hayagriva Prabhu is in Goa. So he traveled from Mumbai to Goa just to catch hold of Hayagriva because he knew how much Prabhupada loved him. So while he was searching for him on the beaches of Goa, he found Hayagriva Prabhu under an inverted boat. So he sees him and he says, hey, Hayagriva, that's you. So let's go to the temple. And he wants to take him back. And then at that point, Hayagriva Prabhu says that I came here to enjoy, but I'm having immense back pain. My lower back is paining. And then Srinathji Prabhu says, don't worry. I will take you to the best doctors in Mumbai. We'll get it completely diagnosed. Everything will be taken care of. Just come with me. So he takes him to Mumbai, gets the diagnosis done, and they found that he had 4th stage cancer of the spine. So he was diagnosed with the cancer of the spine, and he was experiencing immense pain. And because of that, he became paralyzed from his waist downward. At that point, Srila Radhanath Swami met Hayagriva Prabhu. So he asked him, do you have any regrets? Hayagriva Prabhu said, I have no regrets. I have no regrets that I have cancer. I have no regrets that I'm going through all this pain. I have no regrets for what Krishna has given me right now. But I do have one regret. What is that one regret? That one regret is that when I was youthful, when I was able to deliver service, I did not do it. I did not take it seriously. That is the only regret I have. So while saying this, he was shedding tears. And then Radhanath Swami asked him, do you have any desires? He said, I don't have any material desires, but I just have one desire. Srila Prabhupada in 1969 asked me to take sannyas. But at that point, I completely gave him so many arguments and did not take sannyas. Now I want to fulfill that desire of Srila Prabhupada. I want to take sannyas now. So the devotees were looking at him. He was paralyzed, waist down. He couldn't even walk. They were thinking, should we give him sannyas and so on? But because it was his desire and he was going to leave the world in a few weeks, they decided to give him sannyas. So after the sannyas ceremony, the danda was brought to Hayagriva Prabhu, and he took while looking at the danda, he saw Srila Prabhupada in that saffron-clad danda. So he took the danda, he gave it a hug, and he said, Prabhupada, I miss you so much. Please forgive me. I should not have left you. I should not left ISKCON. That is the only thing that I messed up. Please forgive me. And he completely shed tears, and the danda became wet with his tears. And after a few weeks, he actually left the world. And even while leaving the world, he was completely transformed and completely transcended the material world, and he was completely thinking of Srila Prabhupada. A few moments before he passed away, he told Satyaraj Prabhu, who was actually very close to him, that I am actually touched by the hand of God through my Guru Srila Prabhupada. So while he was leaving the world, he had his hands raised and he was saying, I'm seeing Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is coming towards me. And then he left the world. So this particular pastime actually gives me a lot of hope, because I see Guru and Krishna's protection through this particular pastime. Guru's compassion was there. And Guru just took him back to the spiritual world. So I just want to conclude by just summarizing what we spoke today. So we initially talked about compassion versus compromise. So Bharat Maharaj showed compassion in Apad Dharma or emergency Dharma, and that is not wrong. But compromising on his sadhana was a mistake. Krishna's protection was always there, whether we looked at Indradumna Maharaj, Bharat Maharaj, or even the case of Hayagriva. Krishna's protection was always there. So even though Indradumna Maharaj and Bharat Maharaj lost their human bodies, they did not lose attraction, spiritual attraction or attraction towards Krishna. So they both, in the case of Indradumna Maharaj, we saw that we have limited control over our circumstances. We have no control over how others react, but we have control over how we respond. And we should see all the incidents as mercy of the Lord, manifesting for our purification, for our transformation, and our growth. Just as we saw in the case of Hayagriva Prabhu also, he took everything as the mercy of the Lord towards his final days. And faith that Guru and Krishna's compassion is always showered on us, even though we may not see it. I'll stop here, dear devotees. If you have any questions, comments, or criticisms, please share. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Gaura Kumar Prabhu. This is Guru Prasad.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Thank you so very much. Wonderful account of incidents from Srimad Bhagavatam. And along with that, we are given the most recent example of Hayagriva. Actually, one can say, yeah, this all happened sometime in the past, in the, different yugas. How about in Kali Yuga, how things will be? Actually, this is a very nice example of Hayagriva for us to know that if you truly engage in the service of pure devotee, and in this case, of course, he did a lot at that time, although he kind of moved away from that. But whatever that service he has rendered, Prabhupada didn't forget.
Yes.
Because Prabhupada didn't forget, he got the mercy of Prabhupada.
Yes.
And that is the nature of pure devotee. Pure devotee is like Krishna. Krishna never forgets any little service rendered to him. So the same way, Prabhupada, I think that association of Sadhu Sangha actually has benefited tremendously. And I think we are very fortunate to live in the present time, Prabhupada's pastimes, examples and the mercy of the Lord. Actually, a lot is going for us, really. So I think we can all be very happy that we are in such a tradition, which actually is being auspicious for us. And thank you again for giving very relevant topic, because it's very encouraging and inspiring.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it was truly a pleasure to be with all of you in Sadhu Sangha. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. And any other devotees, any questions, please take this opportunity when Prabhu is here for another few more minutes.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so very much for the very wonderful class, and especially the story about Hayagriva Prabhu. I actually have a question in regards to grandfather Bhishma and how I guess he put his duty before the service to Krishna, but at the same time he was still saved by Krishna at the end. And if we can just maybe speak a little bit to that, and if there's any relation to our family, because he basically gave this vow to his family, and then is there any connection to our family if we vow to take care of our family, but if, say, for example, it happens that our family are inimical to Krishna consciousness, then basically, are there any parallels, and what can we do?
Thank you so much for this question, Mataji. It's very, very practical and very, very relevant. So as I mentioned, there are 3 different dharmas that we have to execute while we are in this body. One is Varnashram Dharma, the second is Bhagavad Dharma, and the third is Apad Dharma. So sometimes as practicing devotees, we tend to take the route of fanaticism and ignore the needs of the family and focus just on Krishna. And that can be very dangerous sometimes. There are several examples of devotees who did that and suffered ultimately. I can think of 2 quick examples. So the first example that comes to my mind is there was this one Mataji who just had a baby, but she would go for Mangalarti every day. She would go Mangalarti and not take care of the baby. So this was in Chowpatty. And then when Srila Radhanath Swami heard that, he was not very happy. He said, now is your dharma, it is your duty, it is your responsibility to take care of the baby. And once the baby grows up, then all of you can come together to the temple. So this was one instruction, and then several examples where devotees have, because their guru was there, there was one time where one person did not even go to his father's funeral because his guru was in town, and because he ignored his relatives and went to see his guru, later, so all of his relatives abandoned him. And then later on, he actually fell down and he was left nowhere. He didn't have any support spiritually or materially. So these are examples which teach us that we must have compassion towards our family members first. And then also while doing that, we should focus on Krishna. So this is with regards to your second question. The first question was about Bhishma. So Bhishma was lying on a bed of arrows, and his main thing, as you rightly pointed out, his main duty was to make sure that Hastinapur was in the right hands. And he had to protect. That was his main dharma. Varnashram dharma was to protect Hastinapur. So at the time when he was about to leave the world, there's an interesting pastime that happens. So this was when the Pandavas wanted to see him before he left the world. And just before, and they were running towards Bhishma, but Krishna stops them. Krishna stops them and he says, you should all go get dressed up in your royal robes, like with crowns and everything. So Pandavas were bewildered. I mean, we just want to see our grandfather Bhishma. Why is Krishna asking us to get dressed like kings? But they follow Krishna's instruction. They get dressed as kings, and then they go and see Bhishma, who's about to leave the world. So Bhishma, he looks at them first, and then he's completely satisfied. He looks at them wearing their royal robes, looking as kings, and then he feels that, okay, now I'm completely satisfied that I was able to do my Varnashram responsibilities properly. And then he turns towards Krishna and completely he's able to focus on Krishna. So hope this answers your question, Mataji.
Okay, thank you very much, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. This is Surendra. Dhanvat Pranam, Prabhuji.
Dhanvat Pranam, Prabhu.
I hope you can hear me properly.
Yes.
Okay. My question is, you mentioned, first I should say that in the lecture was very nice, and it reminds us that hearing is so important that it reminds us about our qualities, which sometimes minus Krishna consciousness can become our weakness. And it is like those you might have seen, some people in India, they walk on the path daily and sometimes they find the coin or money like that. Similarly, we hear daily lectures, but regular hearing, sometimes, you get one of those one-off things where it reminds you that, oh, this is at good qualities. But if you attach it with the emotion, these two qualities can become actually the negative factor of your path. And
Yes.
it's very important. Now, you mentioned the verse 1519, which I have heard multiple times.
Yes.
You said fall down. So we know that if we fall too much down, like in case of, for example, Gaura Prabhuji completely left, and someone can become totally out and bad habits, this and that. Very easy to perceive and observe and point out. But then there's even more dangerous than then is the falling in a very subtle form, which can act as a. What do you say? What kind of those things could be, like ego or something? I don't know. I just wanted to have some thoughts about it.
Very, very nice point, Prabhu. You mentioned the subtle falling down on a day-to-day basis. But what was your specific question?
What are those subtle falling down we should be cautious about, and how you want to kind of warn us and be aware of it? Basically, that's my rough question.
So your question is, what are the subtle warnings? So you mentioned also hearing. So if we start losing the taste for any of these 9 limbs of bhakti, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, and so on, if we start losing taste, that is a clear warning that something that we are doing is wrong. So when that starts to happen, we must introspect and see what we are doing that is actually causing this behavior. We must really put ourselves wherever we are, surround ourselves with these 9 limbs of bhakti. That's why Srila Prabhupada's morning program had all of those 5 things: Nam, Dham, DT, devotee, and Bhagavatam. So completely protecting you from all sides, So even at homes, we must make sure that we protect ourselves all the time. And we must really guard against this material world, the material energy, as I explained in the class before, how it can cheat us, how it can trap us, and how it can pull us down. So we must have healthy fear in one sense. And the moment we start losing attraction for hearing, for example, or reading or chanting, then we know that we are not heading in the right direction. Those are the warning signs. I hope it answers, Prabhu.
Yes, it did answer actually very, very nicely. Is that I was worried more about the actual things which I will do as a fall down indicator, but you even made it such a nice way you have put it, is that if you are constantly hearing and if you are associated with those 5 things, devotee association, deity, and everything, I will not even come to the stage of thinking that this fall down thing is existing or something like that, because I will be constantly affected. So in a way, for a moment, I was kind of not giving importance to the hearing. And in fact, my question was itself is my indicating my fall down, that I did not have faith on the hearing. Why did I ask this question? So thank you very much for putting it in such a way. Yeah. Very nice. Thank you.
The fact that you asked this question, Prabhuji, shows your sincerity, shows your determination in this path of bhakti. So I pray that you continue progressing in this wonderful journey, wonderful, blissful journey of Krishna consciousness.
We also pray for you, Prabhuji. Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
Guru Prasad Prabhu, is there?
Yeah, okay. Maybe one short question. Maybe I have some struggle myself. We mentioned about how compassion is necessary. How do actually one acquire compassion? Is it some inborn? Some people seem to have it. Some people don't have it, and they are struggling. And is there something which will help us actually acquire? We need to acquire.
That's another excellent question, Prabhuji. So one of the side effects of pure bhakti is compassion, as we read in the verse from Padma Puran. But as practicing devotees, our chanting is not on the Shuddha platform. Our chanting is in the Namabha stage or Namaprad stage. So because our chanting is not on the Shuddha platform, we cannot expect compassion to naturally develop within our heart. So we're talking about good qualities, virtues, and we're talking about our religious practices. So until we reach that point of Shuddha Bhakti or Uttama Bhakti, we have to keep practicing both, cultivating the good qualities and also practicing our sadhana. So as Prabhupada mentioned several times, we have to be conscious first and then we can become Krishna conscious. So both are necessary. We have to develop qualities of compassion, kindness, generosity, and so on, while practicing our Krishna Bhakti, our sadhana. If we ignore practicing that and just focus on Krishna Bhakti, in our immature stage, we can tend to become fanatic and start putting things that are actually virtues less. So we must focus on both. As parallelly, we have to keep going towards Krishna, because Krishna will not take you to his kingdom if he finds that you're practicing all of these things nicely, but you're not being compassionate, you're not being kind, you're not being generous. Then it actually is detrimental. So both have to be practiced parallelly.
Very good. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If no other question, I think we can say big Haribol to Gaura Kumar Prabhu. Thank you so much. Hope to hear from you again another time.
Thank you, Prabhu. Anytime. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, devotees, we'll have a short kirtan, one bhajan, and perhaps if time permitting, we'll also have a kirtan. Definitely we'll have one bhajan. Hare Krishna.